Community partnerships are a bringing together of various statutory and non-statutory organisations within East Suffolk that actually want to come together and make a difference for the people that live, work and play in our district. East Suffolk Council is a fairly new council. We're now the largest district council by population in the country. We've got 250,000 people. We've got 487 square miles, and that is shared out by 55 councillors. We didn't want to lose touch with the community, so we thought what's important is to introduce this community partnership concept. So we've got 8 community partnerships across the district, and they can really focus on local issues. And we've provided the funding in order to allow them to make that real difference.
The strategic board gives us allocates 300,000 for the whole of East Suffolk. But over the next 3 years, each partnership will get a total of £85,000, which will really enable us to do something very positive, I think, in each partnership.
We are trying to help the people who live in our communities, and one of the things which came to the fore at our very first meeting was social isolation. Another thing which came to the fore was a lack of rural transport.
All of us chairs get together on the Community Partnership Board, so we've actually found that 6 of the Community Partnership Group had social isolation as a top priority, and 6 of the Community Partnership Groups had transport as their top priorities. So the Community Partnership Board, which is above all of the partnerships, have actually taken on the work to look at a wider East Suffolk scale, which is a different amount of funding, which leaves us with our smaller pots of money to actually spend on other things in our group.
So over the life of this council, we've allocated £3.4 million to local community initiatives, and that's made up of the community enabling budgets that the councillors have, or each one of those has £7,500. We have the local community partnerships, each one of those receives £25,000 per year, and the rest is allocated to the Community Partnership Board to spend on projects that cut across a number of community partnership areas.
So we spent our first £10,000 on our younger people. It's been really successful. Kessenland have reopened a youth group which has got about 21 users, ranging from about 11 to 16.
Because we've got open space, we're able to run through the village setup football teams for youngsters up to the age of 10, 11, and that brings a lot of people out just to get entertainment, particularly on a Saturday. And then the cafe, the voluntary cafe, also functions, and they're quite happy to have teas and coffees from there.
Of course, never before have we been through the situation that we're going through now. COVID-19 has created even more of a challenge for our local communities, and to be fair, for the council as well, in the way that we're responding to that and supporting people through this really, really difficult time. So community partnership boards have really come to their fore. You know, the contacts they have made within the local community groups has allowed people to wrap around the most vulnerable in their communities. The food banks have started up, the good neighbourhood schemes, the shopping for other people, just the general coming together of the community, stepping out and clapping for the NHS. All these were really positive things and enhanced the work of the community partnership boards and brought people together where otherwise people didn't even know who they lived next door to before, but now those communities are really building, and we are taking advantage of that growth in community cohesion in order to enhance the work of the community partnerships.
There's been an explosion in terms of people's vulnerability, how isolated they felt for a number of months. And I think at the moment, with the risk that we won't come out of this until March at the earliest, people start to panic, I think, and start to think, when is it going to be an end for me? So we've recognised that, and we've got some fantastic groups in Felixstowe, Basic, Facts, Salvation Army, an organisation we've set up called Felixstowe Helping Hands, who are supporting these people, but we need to coordinate that support.
Because of COVID, we haven't been able to have face-to-face meetings, so meetings didn't take place for a while, but we have now been having them via Zoom. I've been impressed with the number of people who have actually logged on. We are getting as many, if not more, than we had when we were meeting face-to-face.
Overall, we're extremely pleased with how things are going with community partnerships. They've stepped up to working difficultly in the COVID situation and transformed to working online, holding Zoom meetings. It's been a challenge for everyone to get together and to focus on their 3 or 4 priorities that they've set, and the meetings have continued to take place, and they are now delivering spending money and enabling projects to take place in their areas.
Do you know, I think one of the most important things about community partnerships is the support of the officers, because without them none of this would happen. And they turn up to the meetings and they do stuff and they go away and they still do stuff, and it's like a duck. The feet are going away madly underneath and everything drifts along quite happily on top of the water. And there's a huge commitment there from all of the officers that want to make this work. Definitely.
Well, the people of East Suffolk are of course East Suffolk. That's what it's all about. And you know, we're passionate that not only do we want to do the best we can for them, but we want to empower them to do the best that they can for themselves. I think it's very wrong when councils try to tell people what they should be doing and drive communities in a particular direction. So by reaching out in this way, what we've done is we've gone, look, we're here to support you. We will support you through the problem-solving process. We will provide financial resilience in order for you to deliver against those priorities. But it's over to you people. What do you want to do and how do you want to change your local community?
It's doing something for the community, isn't it? And it's if you see the outcomes, that's what you want for people to feel they're seeing that light, they're seeing an improvement.
It's a privilege, really. It's nice to find what you can do for the community, how you can make it better. When we've looked at the statistics and we found what we're in need of, it's been able to make a difference.
The community is effectively a group. It's a group of souls, if you like, all together. And when you get one group working, another one will come on. And this is it. And especially if they've got something to do when they come together. I enjoy people, and I enjoy doing things or helping people along when I can. And that's what I do, as I spend a lot of time doing that.
I'm really pleased to see how many people have come forward and volunteered, and how many people want to give so much back to the communities that they live and work in. We so want to make sure that we deliver the projects to our communities and make sure that we can spend the money and make a big difference. And I'm really pleased with everyone that's taken part. Thank you.
I'll get there. I think I am there. Hopefully, you can all share my see my screen. Good morning, everyone. So I am Steve Gallant. Sorry, I've lost something here. There we go. Sorry, I'm Steve Gallant. I'm the leader of East Suffolk Council and also the chair of the Community Partnership Board. So welcome to this first East Suffolk Community Partnership Forum. During the discussions that would take place at this event, I'd ask that participants remain on mute, and they're not speaking, and raise their hands virtually to indicate when they wish to contribute so that I can invite you to speak. Most, I'm sure, are familiar with Zoom, but if you're not, you can raise your virtual hand by opening the Participants tab at the bottom of your screen and selecting the Raise Hand option. You can lower your hand from the Participants tab. You can also raise your hand by using a shortcut, if you're particularly adept at that, which is Control+Y. We originally, of course, planned to have this as a face-to-face event at Trinity Park to build on our hugely successful East Suffolk Partnership forums that we've had in previous years. But obviously for reasons, we've had to change our plans. However, I think what we've pulled together is excellent and based around issues that are important for us in East Suffolk. So we've got over 200 people have booked onto one or more of these sessions, and this launch event is scheduled to last for no more than about 2 hours. And today we aim to update you on what the community partnerships have been up to, and then to set the scene for the week with an exploration of the role of public and voluntary sector organisations in service, redesign and digital transformation, with reflections on the impact, obviously, of COVID-19 and the response of our communities to the challenges that has posed and continues to pose. So I think, if I may, sorry, forgive me. There we go. So we've got a whole week packed with 11 separate events, all focusing on the priorities identified by our community partnerships here in East Suffolk, and a whole host of partners who I must thank for their support to make this all happen, indeed at relatively short notice. As you can see from the timetable of events that you've got on your screen at the moment, today we've got this Bringing Ideas to Life and this launch event, and our keynote speaker Dominic Campbell will be giving us his insight into the way things are going and what's happening. On Tuesday, we've got the Tackling Social Isolation and Loneliness in East Suffolk, and we've got 4 sessions running of that. And we've got Cormac Russell, who's a leading expert on asset-based community development, Kim Ledbetter from the Joe Cox Foundation, Tracy Robbins from the Eden Project, Anne Osborne from the Rural Coffee Caravan, Sally Connick from Community Action Suffolk, and Nicole Rickard, who's both one of our officers and works for both of the CCGs as well. On Wednesday, with the Travel and Transport in East Suffolk, 2 sessions of that running. We've got Andrew Summers from Transport East, Alexander Nichols, who's the Local Government Association Public Transport Consortium Chair, Susan Davey, Kirsty Marjoram, Carl Ashton and Paul Horn from Suffolk County Council, and Nick Kahn, Anthony Taylor and Jason Beck from East Suffolk Council. On Thursday, we're focusing on technology, and there's also a fringe event of zero carbon communities and their role post-COVID as well going on there. And Morag McGuinness, Stuart Wise from BT, James Mallender, who's my environmental cabinet portfolio holder, Graham Duxbury from Groundwork UK, Richard Powell OBE, and Jane Healy from Greenprint Forum, and will be hosting and joining in that session there. And on Friday, we'll be looking to wrap it all up in our closing event with myself and Nicole Rickard looking at just pulling together everything that we've learned and what's been happening over this week. So community partnerships. It's just a very, very short reminder. I mean, I hope that most of you are familiar with the setup that we've got in place. So a community partnership is really, it's an innovative way for the council, partners and communities to work together to bring ideas to life by tackling key issues that are happening within the local community by taking a solution-based approach to local priorities. So why do we set them up? We set them up really on forming this new East Suffolk Council, which, as I'm sure you're aware, is the coming together of Suffolk Coastal District Council and Waveney District Council. We had some concerns that with the growth of that geographical area, which you can see represented on the map there, what we didn't want to do was to lose the hands-on focus that we can maintain with the local communities. So we decided on setting up these 8 community partnerships. But it's okay setting up partnerships, and what you must do is you must provide the resources in order for them to deliver against the priorities that they have identified. And laid out on that slide there is the budgets that we've allocated to that. The membership of each community partnership varies to reflect the areas that are there. So there was some of the more urban areas bring together the community groups and statutory and non-statutory partners that within that area. In some of the more rural communities, again, we're bringing together smaller but equally important groups that are delivering within those rural communities. And we know the challenges that the rural locations can face. It's important for us to introduce a sensible way for actually identifying what those priorities were. And so we looked at data packs. We produced a data pack for each of the 8 community partnerships. And working together with the local communities, with the community groups, with the towns and parish councils, we started to build and explain to local people what the stats were telling us, what the demographics were, what the issues that were being recorded. And we're very, very grateful for the work of the Suffolk County Council Knowledge and Information team, who really did a fantastic job of making sure that we had the most up-to-date information that we had. But it's okay having stats and information. What you then need to do is you need to check whether that is valid and real for the people that are actually living and working in those various areas, because sometimes the stats don't tell the whole picture. So it's important that we did that checking out of information as that progressed. So each community partnership had a workshop between October and November of last year, where many people come together, between 30 and 80, depending on the particular area that they're there. And each workshop focused on the tailored data pack for their particular area, produced by by Suffolk County Council Knowledge team. And at that workshop, they agreed 3 priorities that were relevant to them and relevant to the area that they were hoping to make a difference in. So this is the 8 community partnerships, and each of them has now reviewed their priorities in line with COVID. Of course, there has been significant changes. They met in their community buildings, and they all have since held their first meeting. But then, like many other community groups, when lockdown came, we had to move to a virtual meeting from there. And that was really quite tricky initially. Lots of issues around IT and connectivity and everything else, but they really have worked tirelessly, supported by the communities team, in order to make sure that those meetings are still happening, and they're happening following the guidelines and social distancing. And many of the partnerships are now focusing much of their time on supporting communities to tackle the COVID pandemic that we're finding ourselves in. So if we look at each CP community partnership is now working on their individual priorities, and those are listed on the screen at the moment. And you'll see that on some community partnerships, the priorities are very similar. But I think what's important is that they are now spending their budgets on projects that have been identified and are supported and are seen as important for the local communities. Sitting above the community partnerships, we established the Community Partnership Board. So all 8 of the Community Partnership chairs sit on the Community Partnership Board alongside our key partners, including the CCGs, the police, ourselves as East Suffolk Council, Suffolk County Council, SALC, Community Action Suffolk, local business leaders from BT to Dastrel Park, from Snape Maltings, EDF, and environmental groups and environmental organisations which are represented by the Greenprint Forum. The board is tackling some of the really important issues that are common to many of our community partnerships, many parts of East Suffolk, be it our larger towns of Lowestoft and Felixstowe or other coastal and market towns or our many rural areas. We operate by looking at the data, identifying the issues and then working together as a board in order to find solutions. What's important though is not just identifying the issues, but having the ability to do something about it. So we look then to deliver the solutions either by commissioning projects that tackle them or setting up targeted grant schemes, or by working with our strategic partners to streamline systems or collectively lobby to influence for change. The priorities, two main priorities that the Community Partnership Board is tackling at the moment is tackling social isolation and loneliness, and dealing with, or attempting to deal with the transport issue, particularly in our rural communities. So the Community Partnership Board's had 3 meetings so far. It's got this budget, which again has come out of New Homes Bonus of 300k per annum. And we are already spending a significant amount of that money. So far, we've spent on things. We've contributed to the Hardship Fund and the Hidden Needs Fund. We're supporting a campaign to attract and retain community volunteers. We put up 100k to set up the Bounce Back Fund that launched recently to support voluntary community groups to survive and thrive by adapting how they operate under the COVID restrictions. And we're putting together a support package for our 8 community partnerships to engage better with their rural areas. And we've been very pleased to support and extend the East Suffolk Grand PADS loan scheme, which is proving a real lifeline, and no doubt will again as we move into this second phase of lockdown for many of our more vulnerable members of the community. So these next 3 slides just demonstrate the impact that the community partnerships are having, and they list some of the many projects that are being worked together to either develop and or fund in their areas. Now, of course, some have had to be put on hold because of social distancing measures, but I don't have time today to go into each one of these, but this is really, these next 3 slides are just to give you a bit of insight into what's going on. If you want to know more about any of these individual projects, some will be covered in the session at 2 p.m. tomorrow, titled Connecting East Suffolk, or you can make contact, of course, with the chairs of your local community partnership to find out more about what they are actually doing. So overall, the community partnerships are really absolutely where we hoped they would be. And they're already making a significant difference in their local communities. They've responded magnificently to the challenges of moving to virtual working, to follow guidelines for meetings and social distancing. And I really do thank everyone involved for that. They're spending their budgets on real projects, and you'll hear more about those throughout the week. But this is just the first and extremely challenging year, and I want to stress that this is a long-term program, and we want them to achieve much more in the future as they become more established within their local communities. Each community partnership, we need to build their own track record of delivering, both real and tangible improvements on the ground in their communities. So this is a significant investment for East Suffolk Council. A total delivery budget across all 8 community partnerships and the Community Partnership Board. It's around about £1.7 million over the life of this council. So it is about tackling priority issues that have been identified as important by our people, which is the people of East Suffolk. So I'm going to move us on, if I may, to our key speaker. So our keynote speaker, Dominic Campbell. Dominic is a digital government entrepreneur with a background in organisation design and digital transformation. Having spent 5 years implementing large change initiatives within local government, Dominic founded FutureGov in 2008 to bring human-centred design and digital technology into the heart of public sector transformation programs. Major projects include large-scale reinventions of the children's social care technology and practice with West London authorities, working with senior management and politicians in Essex County Council to design and deliver a multi-year digital transformation programme, and leading the organisational redesign of Homes England as interim chief digital officer to help better equip it with the tools, capabilities and behaviours needed to position them as an exemplar of public sector organisations in the 21st century. He regularly advises all levels of government internationally across the USA, Australia and the United Arab Emirates. Dominic has taught at a range of business schools, including Harvard's Kennedy School in the United States, INSEAD in France and the IMD in Switzerland. He's currently helping to lead the Towns Fund, especially supporting town boards with their governance and leadership to support long-term success of the investment that is allocated to them. So I'm really, really pleased that Dominic has taken the time out of his very busy schedule to come and give us his views and a little bit of insight. And I know what he has to say will both be interesting and challenging. So Dominic, over to you, if I may.
Hello, everybody. Hopefully you can see my screen.
Yeah, it's there. Thank you.
Brilliant. Okay, great. Thanks so much for having me again this year. Sorry I can't be with you in person, but this is the strange new world that we all live in. I would say probably the theme of my talk is going to be one of reflection over the past year and an attempt to look forward, but I have to say that I'm probably no more equipped to have an effective crystal ball on where we're going right now than anybody else on this call. But I will start to try and pull out some of the themes that I'm seeing as I go around the country and listen to other areas and colleagues that you have around local government elsewhere. Just quickly, you've heard already, but FutureGov is a company of about 100 people spread around the UK. We're probably what's best known as an opinionated consultancy, I would say. So we definitely have some fairly strong views on where the world is and where it may be going next. Sorry, I'm just adjusting my laptop. But equally, we're here really to help. We're here to support local public services in any possible way we can, looking to bring the sector forward into more modern ways of working, supporting the sort of responses that you've all been responsible for in recent months and years, and very much see ourselves as a sort of an ally to places and the public sector to help you make the changes that you're experiencing currently. This is just really to say that in many ways, we're a perverse organisation in that we chose to start focusing from the beginning on child protection, partly through it being a particular interest and passion of mine, but also really to try and demonstrate that if digital and design and modern ways of working can be applied into child protection, then essentially any part of public service and public service delivery can benefit, can be part of the change that we're looking to see in the world. At the essence of who we are really is a belief in public institutions. It's not a very trendy position to take, I think, in 2020. But from when I look back over the last 20 years that I've been working with government, and I think about where my passion is in particular and where our USP is, it's definitely recognizing the pivotal nature of public institutions in catalyzing outcomes for communities when done well. Obviously, that isn't always the case, and obviously there's always more that we can be doing. But when you think about the democratic legitimacy, the ability to scale responses, the ability to provide that sort of universal safety net, we have a passion for ensuring that public institutions are enduring, move with the times, and work much more closely and effectively with communities to be able to define and achieve their shared outcomes that they're looking for in any given place. And obviously very interested to hear the work that's going on in East Suffolk, and which very much puts you at the forefront of thinking very deliberately about how you can design for connection between local government and communities through your partnership work, which is really fantastic to see. Interestingly, I came across this diagram when I was preparing for this talk, which we only put together possibly 6 or 12 months ago, and in many ways shows how much life has changed, how wrong we were, how naive, how institutionalized in some respects my mindset was as a sort of local government nerd, where essentially I was putting, local government and the council at the center of everything, thinking very much about what is its role within a place. And of course, much of this stays true. And much of this is why I'm so passionate about local authorities and local public services. When you think about the ability of a democratically elected organization to be able to lead by example, to sort of scale its influence through policy design, service delivery, funding, procurement. As you go out through these circles, you start to see sort of weaker and weaker influence and weaker responsibility for the council itself, and much more power and autonomy and control for community action within place. But as we were reflecting on our mission and what we, the world that we're seeking to support, and this was, as I say, thinking about our mission as an organization before March, we were very much thinking of it in the context of climate action and working much more closely to support communities to organize for change. But then along came the last 6 or 8 months, obviously, and in many respects, on the one hand, proved the point, but in another way, provided a much more immediate sort of test bed for thinking about what we call organizing for change. So thinking about, how do we very deliberately redesign our organizations so that they are fit for the 21st century. The title that I gave my talk originally was 2020, the year public services, the year that the 21st century arrived in public services. But then I thought that was probably a bit too abrupt. But in many respects, I think that's true. When you think that the internet has had an influence in our lives for over 25 years now, if not more, it's interesting that it's taken something like this for us to fundamentally rethink the way that we work, the way we collaborate, the way that we use technology. But we're getting there now. And as I'll come on to, I think the main lesson there is, how do we really reflect on what's happened, not just sort of rest in this slightly strange halfway house between the old and the new, where essentially we're doing the same but from our spare bedrooms, and instead think very deliberately about how we design our organizations, so that we get the best of all worlds as things start to change again. But what became really obvious to us as an organization was that we just weren't doing enough to support communities, given our sort of commitment to public institutions. There is only so far that we can go in terms of changing our places if we're not balancing out our sort of investment, our power relationships, the organizing approaches between taking the best of our institutions and our community assets, and thinking about how they can learn from one another to have the most beneficial impact for our communities possible. And we've talked for a long time around, within organizations, the power of technology, service design, sort of classic change management. But when we thought about it in communities as well, there are a lot of parallels in terms of like the way that people organize themselves. You think about how mutual aid groups responded through civic tech, through WhatsApp and other things, where participatory design, things like citizen assemblies, weeks like the one that you're having this week to bring people together to think about the future of your communities, as well as then very deliberately designing for communication, learning and development, mutual understanding, that really trying to draw on very well established now community organizing practices from the States and elsewhere. And how can you bring all of those together to actually increase the surface area between the organization of public services and the community organizing that many of you on this call do every day in your lives? Because in many respects, the challenge that I see in many places, and possibly less so in East Suffolk, is that the surface area between communities and organizations is far too small. There are nominated engagement officers whose role it is to essentially be the middle of that communication point. And how do we actually make sure that we expose both sides to one another as best as possible to create mutual understanding and really try and make sure that we use the best of all resources in a place to achieve outcomes that are best for all. And the way that we look at this again is sort of a very place-based approach, with public services at the centre of that, delivering part of those services, but obviously very strongly supported by their public and their private and voluntary sector colleagues as well. Although, interestingly, what I'm hearing around the country an awful lot right now is the sort of breakdown of sectors in some respects, in a positive way. Particularly when you're on a call like this, it's very hard to work out who's from a local plumbing firm versus the leader of the council, and it has this great flattening effect and quite leveling effect to say, and any idea is a good idea, any offer of support is a good offer. We're all in it together. How do we actually think about place first and foremost? And what I'm seeing is a bit of a trend towards essentially localized governance or government and nationalized government or governance, and there's nothing much beyond that in many ways. Of course, there is citizens' advice versus CCG versus council versus local retail shops. But at the same time, in many respects, they're far more strongly bonded together than ever through purpose for place than any real relationship between local government and central government, for instance, that actually tries to form those together as sectors. But actually, it's really about place versus policy or Whitehall in many respects at the moment, as we come together to respond. And we have to think about what do we want to take from this era into 2021 and beyond, and very much think about what are those boundaries we can continue to erode, where are they unhelpful, where are they helpful, and how do we purposefully design for place. The thing that we're thinking about a lot at the moment is transitions. I think obviously we had a massive system shock, a huge amount of national trauma over the past 6 months, which in many ways meant that those of us involved in the response couldn't really think beyond lunchtime, let alone the future beyond that. but it feels very much like, despite what's coming on Thursday, we're in a phase now of sort of manage sort of survival on the one hand, but also thinking about the future, and that probably involves three things. One, it's about consolidating the benefits, if we can put it that way. You know, as hard as it is to say that, the things that we've learned that we want to positively embed going forwards, and that might be anything from talking to your GP on your video phone app, or being able to participate in you know, workplaces around East Suffolk and around the world at the click of a button. And so that's about consolidating the now. There's a bunch of work going on around imagining a variety of futures, but in many respects that's very much think tankery at the moment, because you know, as of 10 days ago, there wasn't going to be a national lockdown, and now there will be. So in that kind of context, how can any of us really sort of strategize in the way that we used to, with 3 to 5 year corporate plans and sort of single point vision statements that get us to a known place with so much up in the air? But nevertheless, it's useful to have alternative futures in mind when we're thinking about what we're aiming at for our places. But it really importantly for me is, in the context of all of that, how do we think about ways of working? How do we think about what are the skills, the capabilities, the communications, the technologies that we need in order to help us put one foot in front of the other while times are so uncertain? How do we feel our way forward in a world of so much greyness, and what tools and approaches can help us get there in a way that gives us just enough comfort without false certainty, which is something that we really think people should be focused on and investing in. So to put that another way, this is sort of one way of framing the world that we're in right now. So we've very much been in response. I think probably we felt we were further along into recovery up until this week. And in many respects, it's sort of how do we keep responding? How do we plateau? How do we not move backwards at very least? Is very much the sort of theme of the day at the moment. But at the same time, like, how do we find the space to reimagine the world as is, and where we want, one that we want to go back to when things start to relax and return to some form of normality again. I think another thing that we're seeing is how the future reveals itself slowly and then suddenly all at once. If you think about whether it's climate action or digital era technology and ways of working, they've both got a lot in common, actually, in that they've been very sort of present in our lives for 30, 40 years. And we've been in their shadow. We've sometimes been dragged along by them. Sometimes we've been in control of them. But very much a sort of slow burn of looking to the future and different sort of shafts of light as to what might be coming. And then you could say that the last 6 months has almost represented an awful lot of catching up, coming very abruptly and very fast, which is very hard to manage. And it is about taking a breath and thinking about, right, you know, if the 21st century has now arrived in our places and in our organizations, what do we want to take from that? And how do we almost reboot where we are, who we are, how we're working, in order to not just survive, but also thrive in coming decades? And if you think about organizations, I don't know about yours, but certainly from the one I live in and working across many organizations, in many senses, our organizations don't feel like they exist, and the same with your local partnerships in the same way that they were before. And we're very much just connected together through purpose and place, which is great, but also comes with risks around fragmentation, you know, the burnout, the endless Zoom culture, et cetera, et cetera. And so, you know, through that fragmentation, like, how do we take this time to think about what we want the world to look like when we return next year or beyond, when that sort of elastic force comes in and pulls us back into the sort of familiar form, or more familiar form than we're in right now? What, like, really, how do we take this time to reflect on the level of radicalism, change, the good, the bad, and the ugly that we want to leave in the past or bring forward from 2020 into the future? And how do we double down on sort of new institutions, partnerships, community relationships? What does, radicalism look like? And it doesn't have to mean, manning the ramparts and doing, ridiculous things. It very much just means like thinking purposefully, designing our ways of working to fit the world that we're in now, rather than essentially just the digitization of our old ways of working and our old world, so that we spend our lives forevermore on our laptops. I'm just going to talk about three things to give you some sort of real examples from the work that we're working on and some of the things that we're seeing in the UK and beyond. So, I was part of a team that was in Camden, London Borough, that was part of the response to the immediate COVID crisis. Obviously, London was immediately hit, even though it's in a slightly different place now. So I can share some of the lessons from that experience. How do we then, as I say, invest in this sort of capability, ways of working? And I'll just give a couple of examples of things we're working on there to sort of maybe sort of share some thoughts and help with some imagination around, how do we think more about investing in our local partnerships and thick networks of connection between us all. But then also, like, what are the sort of what are the big ideas of where the world might be going? What might public services aspire to with their places and with their communities beyond the here and now? So I'll just give one example of that as well. So the theme of the day, I guess, and this week more than ever, is sort of keep going but consolidate the gains. How do we actually make sure that we get the best out of everything that we've done so far, so that every time we have a lockdown, every time we need a new response beyond COVID, even whatever the next crisis might be, whether it's climate or otherwise, how do we make sure we move forward from a stronger position, from a position where we've learned our lessons, consolidated our gains, and can build from a higher position than we started. I thought this quote from a sort of Bloomberg Harvard article kind of summed up kind of very neatly those of you who were part of the last 6 months response, the experience that we all went through, really. I think one of the interesting things was the leaders that I was working with around the country during that time. One of the hardest things was doing so many things counterintuitively. So you're so used to being present and sort of running towards a fire when you're in a leadership position in the public and social sector. But really, for the first time in my 20-year career anyway, we were having to think extremely counterintuitively, sending people home, living on laptops, not being able to see people face to face and rally the troops, because that was the worst possible thing to do, because of putting people at risk by doing that. So everything has been an experiment, and everything has been a moment of learning. And interestingly, just to give you an insight into the work that I was involved in Camden at the time, Camden I have to give Camden a huge amount of credit for the way that they responded. I'm sure yourselves and others were the same, but that was just the place I was and what I heard. But Jenny Rowland, the chief exec in Camden, even before the speech that was the precursor to the lockdown speech, so the one that said London, the week before the speech that said London's 3 weeks behind Italy, Jenny and team were already on the phone to me saying, I want to make sure that whatever happens, we have no regrets, that our gold response, our sort of top-down service protection, protect the most vulnerable in the community response will be good. We have great colleagues, we're professionals who can get us through this on a sort of, a core basis for those people that we're used to working with. But the thing that Jenny and Georgia, the leader, were very keen on was no regrets, was thinking, how might we introduce some sort of expansive thinking, some creativity to the approach right from the start, in order that we could do as much as possible to support as many people through the crisis. And so that led early on in mid-March to some core principles that have been true to their response all the way through. It was very much about seeking out the most vulnerable, people who they knew, but also people who we all know that we don't know in our communities, certainly from a public sector perspective. How do we make sure everybody gets all the essentials they need, no matter what the funding pot, whatever the regime, just do whatever's needed. Guide people to a range of support, not try and do everything. I think the important one at the bottom though was how do we start to prepare for the long term now, which is the bit that I felt was very ahead of the game in many respects. To be talking about that before the end of March, in a world where London was being hit by a wave of trauma and change, was very interesting to me. And in many ways, that's where we joined in. And this sort of mindset was how we thought about it, which is again how we've all been thinking about it, I think, where the blue circle represents those known people who would come through to us through the shielded list, who are the sort of known knowns within the NHS data as defined by government policy. Then that's expanded and augmented by the green circle, which was known to council and VCS. So who is everybody we know who may need some support during this time, and how can we provide package of support to them beyond just the core shielding list? But then probably like more importantly of all, or as importantly, but just over the longer term, is that black circle around the outside, which is who are the most vulnerable out there, or people who become vulnerable who are just unknown to us. At that point, obviously, we didn't know about furlough schemes. We were thinking about how many, Uber drivers were about to lose their career and go from being, perfectly financially stable to essentially falling into destitution. And how could we use data, relationships, ways of working within partnerships to actually reach out and try and get ahead of the game and support those people before they reach crisis. So one hell of a lot for all of you and for colleagues in Camden to be doing in days and weeks. Where we actually started was really a sort of innovation program in a way, which I know sounds slightly strange to say, but it was alongside the core response. And the core response was very much about the food parcels and other things. But what the intended methodology of our approach was that every week we would take essentially a new problem to solve. And so week one in the middle of March was about ensuring everybody had food, thinking in a sort of what we were calling a design sprint over 5 days to come up with ideas with colleagues, to test some ideas in reality, and then make decisions on the Friday and implement them on the following Monday. And the intention was then to follow that up with a childcare week, with a transportation week, with a social isolation week, on and on and on. So that one after the other, we could start to think creatively and expansively across those three circles to support as many people as possible with current and new services that were spun up over time. The reality is that one, that was just too slow. We didn't realize quite how slow, within 3 days of doing it, you realize you haven't got week to week to week to do thematic design sprints. You needed to do 10 simultaneously in 1 week so that you could respond all at once, because of how it went from 0 to 100 in what felt like a matter of a week in terms of the scale and speed of response required. But within that first week, we came up with a range of interesting solutions around working with people like, a very London solution, but working with people like Deliveroo, who partnered with AGK, brokered by the council, so that AGK was taking phone calls so that nobody needed to download any apps to overcome a digital divide. And Deliveroo built a piece of software for AGK's contact center so that they could actually order on behalf of older people who may not have been able to go out, or disabled people who were not able to go out, but did have money to be able to buy their own food. Then alongside that, we worked in partnership with people like Co-op to provide prepaid procurement cards for people who were struggling, ready meals through Sodexo and others. And so this whole range of, and then there was just a gift of money and food to food banks, which, given given I said with a lot of love for a sector I've only ever worked in, getting a local authority to essentially write a 6-figure check to just hand over at goodwill within 3 working days shows how councils and others just essentially, to some degree, within the bounds of legality, threw out the rule book and just did whatever it could to help people wherever they could, which I thought was of great credit to them and others. And Camden, again, we're trying to use this moment to bring together the sector, to bring together other local authorities around London, a whole range of sort of startups, voluntary and community sector organisations, to build a sort of community of responses. When we recognised that we couldn't go week to week to week, and we needed other people to help us come up with solutions, we threw open the doors and said, who wants to be a partner? What should our local response to coronavirus be? Who's willing to take on the social isolation challenge with a bit of spare capacity in order to try and help? Definitely had mixed success. I think what we definitely learned was it's easier to collaborate within the boundaries of an organisation than across localities, but we've known that for quite a while, I think. But nevertheless, an interesting lesson learned as a way of problem solving and bringing organisations together. I'm just going to skip through bits of these. Talking to that point of like trying to build for the future, Camden were very explicit that they wanted to use some of the thinking that they'd done around multidisciplinary teams, cross-sectoral teams that they'd experimented with, and actually double down on them and go and make this the beginning of the new future of a multi-team, multi-organizational public service in the broadest sense of the words, using this COVID response as essentially the demonstrator of why that is the right way to work, to break down organizational boundaries. And so we had designers alongside their core response team to think very much around what is working, what isn't working, how do we codify it, how do we join people together to make change happen that sticks in the best way possible. And so we went through this sort of parallel design process to make sure we were picking up lessons and implementing it wherever possible, so that it would actually have this long-term benefit for Camden, which we're seeing coming into its own as the second wave and lockdown is upon us. This is now just sort of infrastructure, both technology, data, ways of working within the borough that maintains strength amongst these partnerships, and that enables them to solve many of these challenges around childcare, education support, a whole range of things together as multi-agency teams every day of the week. And it was interesting because after all of that, I then found this quote from Dave Snowden, who's a really great big thinker, which was sort of advice from last year, I think, which is in a crisis, you should always deploy an innovation team alongside business recovery teams to capture the novel practice. And I would say we were essentially doing that, but not just to capture the novel practice, but also to capture it, codify it, sort of sell it back to Camden to say, look, this is what you've done. This is how we view it. This is why you should just mainstream this. So it was almost like a pitch back to them as to what had worked well and what more they could do. But I certainly see that was of benefit in that response. The second theme is around investing in the ways of working, investing in skills. Like, how do you do the work now that enables you to come through this transition, strong, resilient, well-connected partnerships with the right people and the right capacity and the right places to hold you together as a sort of partnership setup? And I saw in the earlier presentation so much of what you've done. I guess it might be just reflecting and thinking, how do we ensure that we sort of give this one more kick of the tires to make sure it's exactly where we need to be in the world that we now live in, and where it's both about place but also about a virtual coming together of communities. Because the key thing for us, I think, is that most organizations were never designed, full stop, let alone for the internet era, and definitely not for pandemics. And so we've got to be really careful not to just rely on tools, mindsets, approaches that we relied upon before the pandemic and before the digital age to take us beyond 2020. It might be that you have many of those tools available to you. It might be that some things need to be stopped, some things need to be accelerated, but it's definitely a good time to do that kind of reflection. Because if we don't bring change to our organizations, then the services, the partnerships that we hold are just not going to change. If we're running in the same sort of governance, the same sort of communication models, et cetera, it's, we're not going to be fit for the world that we're in now. And so what I find is that having spent 20 years talking about agile ways of working and design-led approaches, it's almost like become a given in many respects, given what we've all gone through. That just as organizational silos are breaking down, so we also recognize that things like Prince2 and some of these very cumbersome and slow ways of working just give us false certainty that we can't be even at all certain of anymore, and over a time frame that's too long for when we need to respond in hours and days rather than months and years. And so in many ways, it's how do you adopt these things fast? How do you, this is just some of the examples of, where we and others, and I'm sure yourselves, pivoted immediately to working in remote ways, to consult, to engage. We're just about to start I think one of the UK's largest citizen assemblies working with Blackpool around their climate response. And that will be highly digital, given that Blackpool is currently one of the corona hotspots. But how do we actually really not just have these tools as sort of add-ons or nice to haves, but how does this become how we do work now? And just to give you a couple of examples of slightly wider capability building programs that we're involved in. So one's around the Towns Fund, which Lowestoft's part of. And then the Bloomberg Philanthropies program, which is supporting 20 EU capital cities, which was both of those were meant to mean a year of traveling on trains and planes, but obviously have had to pivot overnight to supporting towns and cities across Europe remotely, which has definitely had its pros and cons. In many ways, you cut down some of the inefficiencies of travel and other things, but I don't know about you, but at the same time, you also lose a bit of the elegance of life and a bit of the human relationship, the trust building, which is a lot harder when you're a pixel on a screen rather than a person in a room. But nevertheless, it's interesting to see quite what you can do as you'll reflect yourselves in this world that we now find ourselves in. And so the Towns Fund, we're part of the delivery partnership, which is led by Arup, but also involves others like Grant Thornton and Copper and ourselves. And it really is about supporting this £3.5 billion investment in towns. It was actually conceived, I believe, by the May government, but then obviously got rolled very strongly into the levelling up agenda of the current government. As a way of supporting and investing in towns around England, specifically to help them around urban regeneration, skills, transport, and other things. And so we're there as what's known as the capability partner to support those towns to think very much about their vision, their strategy, their theory of change, the place they want to be, how they want to engage their communities. And then the part that I'm responsible as well around things like town boards, around supporting them with their leadership development and governance approaches to make sure that once that vision and strategy is set and the money is received, how do we make sure that it's well spent and that it isn't just about passing the test of getting the money, but is also about a 5 to 10 year sort of infrastructure of community leaders capable of supporting the delivery all the way through of that vision through that expenditure. And then the second one around capability building is Bloomberg EU Cities. It's very much about essentially how do we generate city hall of the future? How do we provide places across Europe with the support that allows them to think about, what does it mean to be responsive and user-centered and use data, use technology to better engage with their communities. It's covering 20 capital cities across the EU. London snuck in for now. And and the ones in pink are the ones that FutureGov are supporting to help them do prototype different ways of working and test new ways of becoming the city hall of the future, which is a fascinating, to see how many cultural similarities and challenges there are. Everything from sort of housing shortages to health and social care, to better use of data, are all on the table with those cities in pink, and very much different but similar context to what we see in the UK and elsewhere. But again, just thinking about, where you go as an area, like what is the kind of investment you're willing and able to make in capabilities and ways of working that allows you to continue to consolidate and move forward in the way that these towns and cities are doing around Europe. And then the last thing before I finish is really about finding some space for imagination. It's pretty hard to do right now, and it's sometimes imagination results in something very boring, like use Microsoft Teams more, or it results in something far too imaginative, which is imagine a world beyond 2050, where you can't possibly imagine 2021 right now. And what we're trying to do is sort of support places through quite a pragmatic, imaginative process to think about what could be just ahead of us. So in places like Trafford and others, doing a sort of recovery stock take, helping them reflect and move forward. And then like yourselves, others who have gone through local government reorganisation, working with people like Dorset and Buckinghamshire to say, okay, you've done wave one of reorganisation, you're an organisation, you're stable, but where do you want to be now, given the world has changed? And that's super important. But the key is, like, we can be more radical. I'm inspired by the work of John Lewis and partners in how fast they were to recognise where the world was. To some degree, I imagine it must have been pre-baked, and they must have already had their minds on this. And then it just got accelerated by the crisis, because this was published at the end of July, a mere 4 months into the crisis, where they started to recognise and reboot what their values were, what their purpose was. And again, much of it is based around sort of values and process as much as it is outcomes and a single vision of where they're trying to get to. But the really interesting thing for me is, like, if they're capable of pivoting to look at how they can use what will soon become abandoned retail outlets into social housing and become a sort of partnered social housing provider to solve bigger social challenges as a partnership organization with social purpose, and they were able to do that within weeks and months, like we surely must be able to look at all our organizations in that same way. Like, how can we pivot? What can we switch off? What can we do more of? What can we change and do very differently, a different kind of operating model to what we do now for this world in front of us? And this is an interesting quote from Naomi Klein about how, like, everything that seemed impossible suddenly becomes possible. And so as a result of that, interestingly, we've been thinking this past year about a thing called the Institute of Impossible Ideas, which is about rebooting public services from scratch. We've been working with 11 councils around the country to essentially go through a sort of shared imaginative process, to go beyond incremental change. And this was all before Corona. We first talked about this in July last year. And as Naomi Klein says, these things that were the Institute of Impossible Ideas have become the Institute of Possible Ideas. To take services, to pull them out of institutions, to reinvent them in a different way, to seek massive saving gains from them. When you think about things like SpaceX, that now delivers to the space station for 20% of the cost of what NASA did. How can we use that mindset whilst keeping things in public ownership to actually reinvent our public services from a greenfield perspective and from scratch? How do we start with a minimum viable experience around new solutions? And then how do we start to grow those out into system-wide change? And the three areas that we're out looking for partners and venture investment at the moment is essentially around making better use of private homes for public purpose, so that everybody can find a stable home. So that it isn't just about building new homes, but actually using the homes that we already have more effectively? How do we rethink fostering and adoption to help kids have a loving home? And then also the longer term social care challenge around how do we reinvent our social care system and think about how we might keep people independent for longer. And I can share some of those details. My last point, just to wrap up, is really what I would say is after this year, we can surely never say it's not possible because ever again. You've all made the impossible possible in the last 6 months in the way that you work and the way that you supported communities. For me, it's about keeping up the momentum, consolidating where we are, but also then keep searching for more and remaining sort of aspirational and imaginative about where we might go next. So thanks very much.
Thank you, Dominic. I'll just let you end your screen share.
Struggling to do it. If someone can do it for me.
Ah, there we go. Excellent. Dominic, thank you very much. Really, really insightful and some interesting points that have been made there. I will invite questions from the floor for either myself or Dominic, but I suspect that we want to capture as much as we can from Dominic as possible. You can hear from me anytime. I'm always chatting on. But I think what's important here is that we take the opportunity that we can to reflect really on the key points that Dominic's made. I suppose because I've got the floor, I can start off with a question for you, Dominic. I suppose. I was really interested in right at the very beginning. You talked about the design for connections, and I suppose the thing that we are striving all the time for the Community Partnership Board, the individual community partnerships, and indeed the council as a whole, is where is it that we're trying to get to? What is it that we have in mind? And we need to use that old adage, start with the end in mind. How do you eat an elephant? All those other common phrases that come along. So I suppose the challenge I would give to you, or the question I would give to you, is that I'm going to hand you my magic wand, because I hand this magic wand to various people at various times. Some of the people on this call have had it already. And if I could say, if you could change 3 things to improve those connections and to improve that cohesion, what would those 3 things be? But bearing in mind, we're trying to look to the medium to long term with that question, as opposed to, we need to do something next week because we're going back into lockdown. It's about trying to understand where our aspirations for the future ought to be moving and what we can do. So here's the magic wand. Yeah, what 3 things would you be going for?
Oh, you don't start with the easy questions. So I think, it's interesting. We're involved in a project with Central Bedfordshire and Camden at the moment around, it's dryly called data exchange, which is around better connection between the statutory bodies and every other organisation and community group interested in social outcomes and impact in place. And I actually started off as how can we better share data, but actually where it's got to is very much around how do we find the forums by which to identify the challenges together that we're looking to solve, and then how do we all contribute time, people, resources towards solving those problems in a sort of open, transparent, managed way. And I think for me, that's, I used to run the local strategic partnership team in Barnet at the beginning of my career. And when I look back, I think what I mostly did was good governance and sort of minutes and sort of keeping people happy and moving things forward. What there wasn't really was enough capacity in that sort of halfway space between big jobs in big public sector organizations and people who are trying to do everything they can to help in their spare time. And there's this massive middle space, I think, where if the public sector really does want to give up some power and empower people around them, then it has to really invest outside of itself. It has to really think, should this post I'm about to recruit to exist, or could I do something else with that will actually have a more exponential impact in the place? And if we're truly getting to a place of place centricity, and it kind of speaks to this sort of strange double role that councils have, where they're, as leader, you are the leader of a place and of an organization simultaneously. And that's hard because ultimately, those things will come into conflict with each other sometimes. And I think we're heading, when you look at the mayoral models and other things, it feels like we're heading to a place where those things might start to get separated out. Because, if you truly want to focus on the vision, then having a sort of delivery organization under you as well is slightly strange. So I feel like that might be another one, which is thinking about our structures and the way we govern ourselves to make it almost a more fair playing field, a more equal power relationship. Because in many ways, your waste management team is more akin to, a local community organization, for instance, in relation to you as leader and a place shaper, than it is necessarily about democracy and the future of place. I think there's something around just how we really do invest in trust and communications at a really significant level. It's always the thing. So we're supporting one local authority that's just unitarizing at the moment. And I'm reminded yet again that whether it's a technology project or any kind of change project, unitarization project, we massively underinvest in communications and engagement. We always say that it should be 80% on change and 20% on technology, but then we always spend 80% on technology and 20% on change. And I feel like whether it's technology or any other kind of change process, we massively underinvest in that sort of trust, communications and engagement side. And I feel like we've really got to sort of rebalance our sort of investment in where we get to when we're thinking about outcomes rather than about process or inputs.
Okay, I mean, can I just come back on one point there? I mean, I'd be interested in your view, and maybe this is a little bit radical. It's not supposed to be radical at all, but are we in danger of being too prescriptive with communities as national organisations now? Because we're very much moving into the controlling phase of the pandemic, and I understand that. I'm not being critical of it, but we are all the time we're spoon feeding, not literally, but we are spoon feeding and controlling and demanding things of people. Is there a danger that that's going to become the new normal and everything needs to be delivered as opposed to empowered? Is there a danger that that's happening?
Yeah, I mean, it's been an interesting decade of experiment, I guess, between all of those power balances. I think under the Cameron government, in many ways, it was centralization and hyper-localization through big society and other things, and then and a lot of the local institutions sort of fell between those two through austerity and other things. I think now we're in this place where it's predominantly really only centralization, and I don't think there's much beyond that. So I think, and then at a time when local government, for instance, is 10 years into austerity, and is at a point where in some ways it's a huge opportunity for localism. We're almost at our weakest point in terms of finances and other things to be able to enact it. So I guess it's how do we find ways to use those relationships, use the legitimacy, use the power that is vested within local government in particular, to actually create space, as you say, for local areas, because otherwise the only experience, as you say, that people will get is that centralization effect and that top down. Whereas if you can create that sort of umbrella space, I totally agree with you. I think that has to be the thing to do. I think the vital thing is, though, and this is why we use this notion of a theory of change within the Towns Fund, is that you co-produce the vision and strategy, and really understand everybody's strengths and weaknesses as well, and everybody's honest about it. Because I was just on a call before this one with people like the Big Lottery Fund, and they recognise that whilst they say it's people powered and communities first and everything else, that there is also a transition that side of the equation has to go through in order to be ready to accept the power, the responsibility, whether it's finance, whether it's governance, whatever that capability, that community building needs to be. In many places, it's necessary to some degree in order that things will safely transition from top down to bottom up, I think, rather than it's sort of having to break in the middle as we just sort of drop the ball potentially.
Okay, thanks, Dominic. I'm very happy now to shut up for a bit and to pass the baton on to anybody that has a question or comment they'd like to make. It would be useful if you could raise your virtual hand for me, if you're able to do that, and I shall attempt to invite you in to speak. Has anyone got any questions or comments or points they would like to make? Nick Cork has gone for the real hand as opposed to the virtual one, but that's absolutely fine, Nick.
Yeah, I can't find my virtual hand at all. Sorry about that.
Okay.
No, sorry, I couldn't join you initially to start with because obviously first time back, I had to get my team together to talk about where we're going to go with what's happening. But I'm very interesting, Dominic, what you were saying there. And I think one of the biggest issues that we have around here more than anything else is the fact that obviously we're very much a rural community. And I think that throws up a completely different set of, because obviously if you've got a whole mass of people in a sort of confined area, whereas ours is spread out over quite a large area. Quite interesting that I think what I've noticed in the last 9 months or so is the fact that the community is definitely pulling together itself and wants now to, dare I say it, take control of the things they want, and people are starting to open up about the things that they think that can benefit the community and everything else. But it is purely and simply a case of, I think that from your perspective, obviously rural communities are slightly different to whatever. I mean, I did like the whole idea of local authorities giving six-figure sums to local charities and organisations. So I'm sure Steve is just getting his checkbook out, ready to write me one. But no. So how do you see things from a rural perspective? Because I think hopefully, parish councils, town councils have notoriously been taken on by people who've retired, and a lot of these places, it can get a bit bogged down, if you know what I mean, as opposed to looking ahead for the sort of 30-year plans and things like that. I think it's a wonderful opportunity. I mean, God, none of us want to go through what we've gone through and what we're potentially going to go through. But the reality of it all is I think it's great opportunities. And I just wonder how you felt about that.
Yeah, really interesting. I think some of the principles remain the same, which is, we need to do a better job at putting all of our resources on the table in a really effective way. Because I think in some ways, in most places we work, whether it's urban or rural, I think there's a level at which we sort of stop designing. And I think we need to be a lot more deliberate about who's really well placed to do what. And sometimes we just sort of chuck it over the wall and hope someone picks it up in some regards, whether it's in the community or elsewhere. I think it was interesting. The call I was on earlier was around essentially about community response and community engagement in a variety of places. But there was a woman on the line from a small, 2,000 person town, I think in Devon it was. And she was making the point that the difference even between, in her mind, the county thinking it's investing in sort of rural response and other things by giving money to Newton Abbot, which is 10,000-15,000 people. The way she described it was it may as well be Manchester because of the way the rurality works, and it has a very small place by place impact and response in many ways, which is very hard to manage, and I'm sure is very complex. So for me, I think we've done some work in Suffolk, in Essex, in a range of other areas like yours, and can see the challenges, but also, as you say, the opportunities of things like technology and other opportunities that actually create an economic leveling effect. I think in many ways, one of the things that's, speaking openly, that's frustrated me a little bit about the Towns Fund ideas is that many of them are pre-COVID ideas that have just rolled through the past 6 or 9 months and are very much about investing in the high street the way it was and the way we want it to go back to, rather than saying, well, actually, there's an awful lot of people leaving larger urban areas right now, looking for a life outside in rural and coastal areas. How can we actually use that as an opportunity to actually attract people into the 101 plus towns around the country and not towns, in order to really bring new mindsets, new skills, new wealth to the areas. And I'd love to see more places doing that, to be honest. But I'm not seeing so many doing it that explicitly yet, as a sort of place marketing tactic of having an East Suffolk poster on the tube or something. When you're thinking of leaving, come here.
Okay, thanks, Dominic. Thanks, Nick. I've got a couple of other indicators. Belinda, you've put a question in the chat box. I don't know if you're able to ask it in person.
Oh, thank you. Can you hear me now?
Yes, absolutely. Do carry on.
Yes, I just wondered, from your experience, Dominic, what's the best example you've seen of a response to a COVID-19 issue that is also a really good climate change aware response as well? Because sometimes it's difficult to think of both things together.
Yeah, I mean, personally, I don't think I have just yet. I think because there's just more, as you're alluding to, like there's more tensions and frictions in that than there are opportunities right now, as I see them. I mean, maybe us driving around less and having our stuff delivered to us more is possibly a good thing. But then again, Amazon have recruited 10,000 white van men and women in the last 6 months with all the commensurate boxes that come with it. And so, there's swings and roundabouts. Equally, I quite like the idea of forcing TfL to expand its congestion zone as part of its bailout deal. But at the same time, of course, that's a terrible idea for local high streets at a point at which they're struggling during the crisis. I have to say I'm finding a lot more tensions and difficult decisions for political leaders in that space than I am opportunities just now, but open to hearing some if anyone comes across them, for sure. I think the main enduring benefit on that side will be probably a sense of mortality that hopefully we all share now, and a sort of recognition that we can't go on the way we were, and that has to open doors to climate aware conversations in a way that we arrogantly just kept pushing it into the never, but now we feel hopefully a slightly more mortal than we did before.
Can I ask a follow-up question as well?
Yeah.
And I just wondered, again, in terms of what you've seen so far, do you think that the second wave, the second time round, that a big issue is going to be mental health? Because I was looking at one of your diagrams and thinking, I think mental health is going to be, more people are going to struggle this time. Although we've got some of our solutions in place, there's going to be new problems.
Yeah, I agree. And I think, I totally agree. And that's partly where I want organizations to get a lot more deliberate in how they're designing, how they work. Like there's only, if you're in the sort of, if I'm being honest, the privileged group of us who have got stable jobs and, essentially your impact as being go home with a laptop and carry on from your bedroom. Like it's a longer burn, but it's a burn nevertheless. If you're somebody who's been affected by loss, that's obviously hugely traumatic, especially people early on when they weren't able to see relatives and other things. I think there's also a massive employment and skills looming issue where whether or not you get your job back at the end of furlough, the sort of psychological impact of being on furlough, of the sort of many trends that we see in long-term unemployment being manifest in sort of temporary long-term unemployment will have some similar impacts, I think. So yes, and I think applying it from a singular point of view rather than a sort of what are the use cases, what are the personas of mental health, is unhelpful. I think we need to be very specific about the challenges that people are facing and design solutions specifically for each of those different use cases, in my opinion.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dominic. I'm going to invite David Bevan in, but just before I do, David, just a reminder that if you click on the participants tab at the bottom of your screen there, that'll open up a list of the 62 participants that are currently here. And at the bottom of that list, you will see something that says raise hand, and that's the blue virtual hand that I'm looking for. So, but just a reminder. David, over to you.
One of the things we've found in COVID is that there's so many multifacets to people's problems. Like, there's social services, there's housing, there's universal credit, and that sort of thing. Can we create a more user-centered service that and breaks down the barriers between local organisations?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's almost, yeah. I'm hearing that absolutely everywhere. I think even in places where, from what I know of yourselves, like yourselves, that have very strong partnership working, I think most places would even then recognize that there's more to be done. You know, I think most people, I probably speak to half the people I talk to say we were good, but we weren't excellent, and there's a lot of room for improvement. And other places say actually it really just showed the cracks in our relationships with each other and our lack of sort of singular focus on our citizens. When we thought we were, it wasn't out of anything sinister. It just became super obvious that we were either not tailored enough, we weren't nuanced enough, and we weren't necessarily fast enough in our response to support people. The Camden example, and it's all open on the internet, so I can share that afterwards, but is very much a push towards what you're describing. We actually built technology in the middle of the pandemic in order to try and start to hardwire some of that stuff. So essentially, it's almost like an election campaign piece of technology where you have outbound calls, and so you just phone bank and ring, pretty much just work down a sort of most vulnerable to least vulnerable list. And I think they're on, I can't remember what it is now, 10 or 20,000 contacts out of 250,000 people in Camden now, where they then go through the questionnaire of a full 360-degree take on people's lives, rather than, as you say, waiting for them to ring the social care hotline or the, whatever it might be. Then they bring people together around the data that comes through that single version of need system. And then they have that multidisciplinary, multi-agency team look at it and essentially put their hand up and say, allocate that to me, allocate that to me. At which point they all go away with their to-do lists and respond accordingly. And all the citizen has experienced is an interview, is a conversation for half an hour, which is the way that we've all wanted it to be, I guess, for years in many ways. Recognizing how cumbersome it is that somebody has to ring up about one thing and then ring back about the other. So for me, I think I've seen the beginning of the future in that. It's just about how far, how fast, and how wide do we go with that now?
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Dominic. Anybody else got any other questions? I can't see any virtual hands raised. Can't see anyone waving at me. So if you've got a question, shout now or forever hold your peace. Oh, Peter Byatt is waving. Oh, there he is. Hi, Peter.
Good morning, and thank you, Dominic, for this very, very educational presentation. Yeah, Stevie, you know where I'm coming from this one. I'm sure others will. How have you handled dealing with people who are not using the internet? In other words, no digital presumption. How do you get the information out to those people? I mean, we've done tremendously well at East Suffolk. I think, what the teams have done is commendable. But of course, there are always those who will slip through the gap. Thank you.
To be honest, I would be as interested to hear your story as tell mine. But I would say it's probably the thing I lost most sleep over during the crisis, really, was exactly that challenge and the people that I was worried about. I mean, those of you who were close to the fiasco of the shielding data will know that, there was some, if we'd relied on central government data, then we would have, in Camden, we waited and we got a list of 112 people, I think, who were presumably on the shielding list, 112. And I was like, you've missed a couple of zeros off, right? But that was people who had filled in the form on gov.uk. And then there was the challenges of NHS data and other things. And so there's that side of the story, which is like, how can you even be effectively proactive when we're not really in a position? I don't know many places that are in a really good place with truly understanding proactively where the demand is going to be and needs to be in the 250,000 people that you're responsible for, because our data is so siloed and we don't have that view. Then alongside that, as you say, like making a presumption that either people will ring up or use the website to reach out is a big jump. Even a phone call, I think, is a big jump, which I think is now baked into some degree in the sort of door knocking aspect of the contact tracing that now happens, well, variably happens, depending, as a sort of recognition that you can't rely on texting, emailing, calling. There are times at which you just need to get people out there to sort of reach out. But again, it goes back to that diagram I showed where I think I have relative confidence in our systems as a sector in the sort of blue and yellow circles. I think they were the shielding and the on our council systems side of the community. It's that black circle around the outside of either the newly vulnerable or people who have never really been on our radar when they should have been. That, to be honest, I haven't got any silver bullets on that one. I think as we're all talking about to some degree, the sort of partnership approach is the safety net, which is challenging in itself. I mean, we went through a huge amount of data governance issues in Camden around, there's a very good reason why people contact Age UK rather than the council. And they may not be known to the council, and there may be a good reason for that around trust, around, whatever it might be. So how can you both identify and reach out to the totality of everybody known across the public and voluntary sector, whilst also respecting their data privacy and their relationships with those organizations, and actually just supporting them in the right way based on, without contravening essentially their human rights in a crisis. Or if we do it, we do it knowingly and seeking forgiveness because it's better than the alternative, essentially. But interested to hear your views on that in terms of how you've been addressing it.
I think, thank you, Dominic, and thanks for the question, Peter. I think you raise a real valid point. I think the difference also between us and, say, Camden, for instance, is, of course, that not only do we have to deal with the people that choose not to use internet, but we've also got big swathes of our county where they can't use the internet simply because of the connectivity. So there's a two-pronged thing there. I mean, I think the rollout of the grandpads has been a real boost for a lot of people, and has got them online. I mean, there was never going to be enough, but it, that sort of that project has allowed people that have historically been saying, oh, it's not for me, I can't do that, I can't manage that, what do I want that for, to actually go, hey, this is really good. It does allow me to keep in contact with people, to put that online shopping order in, to receive contacts and in a safe and controlled environment. But that's not a cheap solution, as we know. But we've been working in partnership with the CCGs and others in order to provide the funding for those and to roll those out. So I think that has been hugely successful, and of course doesn't require that internet connection that so many other devices do. But I think it will remain a challenge as we look at how that can go ahead. Sue Barnard.
Yeah, I agree with what Peter said, and I would estimate that around here 10% of the households don't have internet connection, not because they choose not to, but because it's a tool that is scary for them. They've never used it at work, and because of age they don't want to use it. And so we need to think about how to get in contact with people like that who might be reticent to answer the door. The Trace and Track app is for smartphones. Lots of people don't use smartphones. I think there's a whole sector of our communities that are very difficult to reach, and that we perhaps need to think of innovative ways of getting there. So it's not a question, it's a statement. Sorry about that.
And that's absolutely right. And I will bring you in, Nick, to comment on that. But just before I do, I think what's absolutely key there, so is the works of the town, the parish, and the local community groups that know these people, can engage with those people and can support those people. Because there's no way that the IT function within the council can reach out to them. It has to be that local person that they trust and already engaged with through the various community groups and parishes, councils that are there, that seeks to bridge that gap. between the message and the receipt of that. Nick, I'm sure you've got something to add on that.
Yes, I mean, obviously, as you know, Framlingham has done quite well basically through this whole project. And what we did was divide the whole town up into 10 cocoons. And we put area leaders in each of those cocoons. So then it would spread down. So that basically all these people then, hopefully you knew who your neighbours were, and we encouraged people to look after their neighbours. And we had delivering leaflets and we're doing all those sorts of things. I think, you know, it's far from perfect, but actually it's worked incredibly well, because I think that is the biggest issue, is these people who are literally, you know, no one knows about, because basically they wanted to keep themselves to themselves. They're desperately keen for their privacy and everything else. But at the end of the day, we set out, which is a bit harsh, but we said we did not want to be part of a community where, God forbid, we found somebody dead at the end of it, and because basically we hadn't had the courtesy, or we hadn't known who was where. And I think that is the whole issue about this whole thing. Basically, is the fact that it is that communication, it's bringing that community spirit back in again, where actually we go back to, call it busybody, call it what you like, but the truth of the matter is, a busybody, it's better to have a busybody who's actually cares about people than somebody who actually misses, and we completely miss somebody. So I think, you know, it is that we talk about GDPR and all these other bits and pieces, but the truth of the matter is the fact that actually has that caused more issues than actually it's solved. Because actually, you know, being able to talk and help about people and talk to people and communicating with people, and, you know, every now and then, yes, we do put the boundaries, but the truth of the matter is, you know, it is for a very good reason. And obviously with the mental health issue which was raised just now, having a thing that we have in Framlingham called the Worry-Free Cafe, it's all about the fact we can still meet in groups of 15. So therefore we are able to tell these people, and people do know it's here now. So the advantage to that is the fact that people can come, and also it enables us also to put in place, you know, the phoning system. You know, and a lot of these rural communities have done some fantastic work, and you know, it's all about working together. And if we can share experiences, this is what hopefully this week's all about. And I think so I want to thank the council very much for obviously putting this up, give us a chance to do that.
Okay, thanks, Nick. I think David Bevan makes a point in the chat box there about unemployed young people helping with technology access amongst the elderly. I mean, that really has to be a local response. You know, if you've got young people in your community that have the time and the skills, and they can be introduced in a way that is going to be non-threatening and supportive to the some who may be elderly and vulnerable within the community, then that's a really positive project. But that needs to be driven locally rather than formed from within the centre and people sent out. Because you know, Nick and Sue make the very important point. It is about building trust. Some people don't want to be bothered and don't want to be contacted, and we need to be aware of that as well. I think Sunila, you've got a question and can't find your hand.
Yeah, hi, thank you. I was really just wondering what your views are around rural housing, in particular, sort of around affordability issues and supporting local rural parishes to try and bring forward local sort of housing, particularly around the issues of job losses and people's concerns around affordability. And I was also wondering what your views are around sort of like the homeless issues as well, because I know sort of at the early stages there was a lot of support around supporting the homeless. So they're my two sort of questions, really. Okay,
that's really useful. Okay, I mean, I'll deal with the last one first, if I may, in respect of homelessness. The work with the homeless within the district and indeed across the county, and some would say country, continues at a pace. I mean, the funding has continued to flow out from central government out to local authorities in order for us to deal with the homelessness. And there's no shadow of a doubt that the initial actions that were taken and did prevent some very what would have been vulnerable people both contracting COVID-19 and spreading COVID-19, which was a real and considered threat across the country. So I think East Suffolk Council took the decision early on to use some of its own void property for the housing of homeless people, which was a really good and sensible decision. It wasn't one of my ideas, but it was a really good and sensible decision to take, rather than using hotel accommodation. So we were ahead of the game when it came to the unlocking, of course, of hotels and hospitality. Now, I can put hand on heart and say that every homeless person within East Suffolk that we are aware of is being worked with by the team in order to find more sustainable solutions and move on accommodation for them. The reality of that, there's always going to be some people that are not yet ready to take that step and to move on from the situation that they find themselves in. And that's a fact of life, and has always been the fact of life. But the reality is that we continue to be in contact with them on a regular basis. The homeless teams are working with all the individuals that we're aware of, and are continuing to offer that support and reach out the hand to even those that don't want to take it at this time. So I think, you know, we are doing huge amounts, and I think, you know, one of the positives that has come out of this pandemic has been the way that we have significantly reduced the number of homeless people across the nation. I think that's really positive. In respect of rural affordability and housing provision, I think, you know, you make a valid point. You know, what is affordable housing? What does that actually mean? Because, you know, the government's definition of affordable housing may be one thing, but the reality, of course, is that truly affordable for our young people is another. East Suffolk Council, of course, is a housing provider. We have stock, the vast majority of that in the north of the county, in the previously Waveney District Council area. We still have a house building projects going forward, and we're looking to reach out further and provide further provision in the south of the county, south of the district as well. So we are absolutely committed to doing all we can and working with partners and housing associations in order to do that. But it's a difficult problem. The other thing, of course, is, you know, what we need is more affordable housing in the rural communities if you want people to go there. Now, I'm just gonna leave this out there. You go and ask some of the rural communities whether they want some affordable housing built in their villages, and see what response you get from that. So there are challenges. The new local plan for Suffolk coastal area has just been adopted, and that does look at the allocations that are there in order to improve it in the south of the district. And I know that there's similar ambitions in the north, but I'm not sure that I can add any more than that at this time. Okay, anybody else got anything to add, comments or questions? No. Dominic, I think our work is done. So first and foremost, can I first of all thank Dominic for coming, giving up his time today. I know what a busy chap he is, and he's in a lot of demand. I'm sorry that we couldn't feed him coffee and biscuits and other nice things as we would have previously done at Trinity Park, but it did save him a train journey, I suppose, coming down for that. So many thanks, Dominic, for giving up your time today. I really do appreciate it.
Thanks so much for having me. It's great to be with you.
Thank you. And to everyone else, many thanks for giving up your time. We've got an exciting range of topics that are ongoing from everybody from right across the week. So if you haven't signed up to any of those, it's not too late, please do. And lastly, thank you for the organisers of today, particularly to Matt and Luke and the team and everybody else that has pulled this together. It was fairly slick as IT goes. I don't feel too embarrassed by my clicking of things and looking for things, but it is always difficult when you've got so many things going on the screen at the same time. So please forgive me if I didn't quite get it right. But and I think that Matt is going to play us out with that wonderful video of me looking so much younger. That's when I was in my 50s. Since then, I've had a birthday. I'm now in my 60s. So there's a younger me on this video, and I'll ask Matt to share that as we all say goodbye. But thanks for coming.
Community partnerships are a bringing together of various statutory and non-statutory organisations within East Suffolk that actually want to come together and make a difference for the people that live, work and play in our district. East Suffolk Council is a fairly new council. We're now the largest district council by population in the country. We've got 250,000 people. We've got 487 square miles, and that is shared out by 55 councillors. We didn't want to lose touch with the community, so we thought what's important is to introduce this community partnership concept. So we've got 8 community partnerships across the district, and they can really focus on local issues. And we've provided the funding in order to allow them to make that real difference.
The strategic board gives us allocates 300,000 for the whole of East Suffolk, but over the next 3 years each partnership will get a total of £85,000, which will really enable us to do something very positive, I think, in each partnership.
We are trying to help the people who live in our communities, and one of the things which came forward at our very first meeting was social isolation. Another thing which came to the fore was a lack of rural transport.
All of us chairs get together on the community partnership board, so we've actually found that 6 of the community partnership group had social isolation as a top priority, and 6 of the community partnership groups had transport as their top priorities. So the community partnership board, which is above all of the partnerships, have actually taken on the work to look at a wider East Suffolk scale, which is a different amount of funding, which leaves us with our smaller pots of money to actually spend on other things in our group.
So over the life of this council, we've allocated £3.4 million to local community initiatives, and that's made up of the community enabling budgets that the councillors have. Or each one of those has £7,500. We have the local community partnerships. Each one of those receives £25,000 per year, and the rest is allocated to the community partnership board to spend on projects that cut across a number of community partnership areas.
So we spent our first £10,000 on our younger people. It's been really successful. Kessenland have reopened a youth group which has got about 21 users, ranging from about 11 to 16.
Because we've got open space, we're able to run through the village setup football teams for youngsters up to the age of 10, 11, and that brings a lot of people out just to get entertainment, particularly on a Saturday. And then the cafe, the voluntary cafe, also functions, and they're quite happy to have teas and coffees from there.
Of course, never before have we been through the situation that we're going through now. COVID-19 has created even more of a challenge for our local communities, and to be fair for the council as well, in the way that we're responding to that and supporting people through this really, really difficult time. So community partnership boards have really come to their fore. You know, the contacts they have made within the local community groups has allowed people to wrap around the most vulnerable in their communities. The food banks have started up, the good neighbourhood schemes, the shopping for other people, just the general coming together of the community, stepping out and clapping for the NHS. All these were really positive things and enhanced the work of the community partnership boards and brought people together where otherwise people didn't even know who they lived next door to before, but now those communities are really building, and we are taking advantage of that growth in community cohesion in order to enhance the work of the community partnerships.
There's been an explosion in terms of people's vulnerability, how isolated they felt for a number of months. And I think at the moment, with the risk that we won't come out of this until March at the earliest, people start to panic, I think, and start to think, when is it going to be an end for me? So we've recognised that, and we've got some fantastic groups in Felixstowe, Basic, Facts, Salvation Army, an organisation we've set up called Felixstowe Helping Hands, who are supporting these people, but we need to coordinate that support.
Because of COVID, we haven't been able to have face-to-face meetings. So meetings didn't take place for a while, but we have now been having them via Zoom. I've been impressed with the number of people who have actually logged on. We are getting as many, if not more, than we had when we were meeting face to face.
Overall, we're extremely pleased with how things are going with the community partnerships. They've stepped up to working difficultly in the COVID situation and transformed to working online, holding Zoom meetings. It's been a challenge for everyone to get together and to focus on their 3 or 4 priorities that they've set. And the meetings have continued to take place, and they are now delivering spending money and enabling projects to take place in their areas.
Do you know, I think one of the most important things about community partnerships is the support of the officers, because without them none of this would happen. And they turn up to the meetings and they do stuff and they go away and they still do stuff, and it's like a duck. The feet are going away madly underneath and everything drifts along quite happily on top of the water. And there's a huge commitment there from all of the officers that want to make this work. Definitely.
Well, the people of East Suffolk are of course East Suffolk. That's what it's all about. And you know, we're passionate that not only do we want to do the best we can for them, but we want to empower them to do the best that they can for themselves. I think it's very wrong when councils try to tell people what they should be doing and drive communities in a particular direction. So by reaching out in this way, what we've done is we've gone, look, we're here to support you. We will support you through the problem-solving process. We will provide financial resilience in order for you to deliver against those priorities. But it's over to you people. What do you want to do and how do you want to change your local community?
It's doing something for the community, isn't it? And it's if you see the outcomes, that's what you want for people to feel they're seeing that light, they're seeing an improvement.
It's a privilege, really. It's nice to find what you can do for the community, how you can make it better. When we've looked at the statistics and we found what we're in need of, it's been able to make a difference.
The community is effectively a group. It's a group of souls, if you like, all together. And when you get one group working, another one will come on. And this is it. And especially if they've got something to do when they come together. I enjoy people, and I enjoy doing things or helping people along when I can. And that's what I do, as I spend a lot of time doing that.
I'm really pleased to see how many people have come forward and volunteered, and how many people want to give so much back to the communities that they live and work in. We so want to make sure that we deliver the projects to our communities and make sure that we can spend the money and make a big difference. And I'm really pleased with everyone that's taken part. Thank you.